It is 20 past 4 in the morning, and every British soldier on the Western Front is standing up in the dark, holding a rifle, staring at a field where absolutely nothing is happening. Nobody is attacking. Nobody attacked yesterday. Nobody will attack tomorrow. And they will do this again at dusk, and again the next dawn, every single day for 4 years. The thing most likely to injure you today is not a German, it is water. Today you live one full day as a British soldier in a frontline trench in France in 1916, hour by hour, not the battle, because almost nobody's war was the battle, the other days. And by the end, you will understand why the two armies quietly worked out an arrangement with each other, and why the men in charge had to invent something specifically designed to break it. 20 past 4 in the morning. Stand to arms. The whole line climbs onto the fire step, bayonets fixed, and waits for the sun. Dawn and dusk were the classic hours for an attack, so this happens twice a day in every trench on the front, which means that 200 yards away, the German army is doing exactly the same thing, at exactly the same time, facing you, in silence. Two armies performing an identical ritual, in the dark, because of each other. 5:30. The rum. It came up the line in stone jars stamped SRS, which officially stood for Supply Reserve Depot, and which the men translated as seldom reaches destination and soon runs dry. Dark, overproof, poured out under an officer's eye and drunk on the spot. You were not allowed to save it. A man with a saved-up ration was considered a problem. Then breakfast. Bacon fried over a brazier, bread, and tea, made from water carried up in petrol tins, which meant the tea tasted of petrol. Almost every memoir mentions it. 4 years of tea that tasted of petrol. 6:30. The morning hate. That is not my phrase. That is what the soldiers called it. Both sides would fire off machine guns and a few shells at roughly the same time each morning, at roughly nothing in particular, and then stop. It released the tension, and it proved the guns still worked. Hold on to that detail. It comes back at the end, and it is the most important thing in this video. 7 in the morning, and you can finally look at where you live. The trench is about 7 feet deep, with a step cut into the forward wall to stand on, sandbags along the top, and duckboards on the floor to keep you out of the water. And it does not run in a straight line. It zigzags, with a block of earth left standing every few yards, so that a shell landing in one bay only kills the men in that bay, which has a strange side effect. You cannot see your own army. From where you are standing, the entire First World War is about 10 yards of mud in either direction. 8 in the morning. Feet. Trench foot comes from standing in cold water for days. The foot goes numb, then swells, then changes color, and in bad cases it turns gangrenous and has to come off. In the first winter of the war, the British Army lost thousands of men to it without a shot being fired at them, so the Army declared war on wet socks. Dry socks went up the line like ammunition. Men rubbed whale oil into their feet, and a single battalion could get through 10 gallons of it in a day. And then somebody had the idea that actually worked. They paired the men up and made each man responsible for the other man's feet, not his own, his friends, because the army had noticed something quite dark about human beings. An exhausted man will not take his own boots off, he will take his friend's boots off. And trench foot in your platoon became a mark against your officer, which gives you one of the strangest arrangements in military history. This was an organization that would order you to walk into machine gun fire, and would formally discipline your lieutenant if your socks were wet. 10 in the morning. Nothing. This is the part nobody films. Daylight belongs to the sniper, so you cannot stand up, and anything above the parapet is seen through a periscope or a mirror on a stick. The day is spent low down in the wet, doing chores, filling sandbags, pumping water out, latrine duty, cleaning a rifle that has to work. The war was mostly housework, performed while crouching, within range of a man whose job is to shoot you. 11 o'clock. Chatting. Virtually every frontline soldier had lice. They lived in the seams of your uniform, and the standard treatment was to run a candle flame down the seam and listen to them pop. It never worked for long, because the eggs survived, and the warmth of your own body hatched the next generation against your skin. Lice carried trench fever. Sudden pain, high fever, 2 to 3 months to recover, and an estimated 380,000 to 520,000 British soldiers affected. Rarely fatal. It just removed you from the war for a season and gave your place to somebody else. The men called the lice chats, and sitting around picking them out of your clothes together was called chatting. Some people say that is where our word comes from. Linguists are not convinced, but the soldiers used it, and I think they had earned it. Midday. Food. Bully beef, which is tinned corned beef. Hard biscuits that could break a tooth. so men grated them down and soaked them into a paste. Makoniki, a tinned stew of turnip and carrot in thin gravy, described by the men who ate it as tolerable hot and an atrocity cold. And jam, plum and apple jam, always plum and apple, by the ton, month after month, until the men were writing songs to complain about it, which is a very specific kind of morale problem for an army to have. 1 in the afternoon, the rats, brown rats in numbers nobody could count, living off the waste of 2 stationary armies. A pair of rats can produce something like 900 young in a year, which means killing them was never a plan. It was arithmetic you lose. Men shot them, clubbed them, and brought terriers up the line for them. Soldiers wrote about rats running across their faces while they slept. Rats in the food, rats in the dugouts, rats that had stopped being afraid of people entirely, and they wrote about how fat the rats were. They all knew why. 2 in the afternoon, the post, which is the thing that actually held the army together. Something like 2 billion letters moved to and from the British Army during the war, and a letter posted at home could reach a man in a frontline trench in a couple of days. It is an extraordinary piece of logistics that nobody talks about, because it is not a battle. But your letters were read. Your own platoon officer censored them, which means a 23-year-old lieutenant sat in a dugout reading another man's letter to his wife, crossing out the name of a village, and then handed him back his rifle and stood next to him for the rest of the week. And when there was nothing safe to say, there was the field service postcard, a pre-printed card with a short list of lines on it. I'm quite well. I have been admitted into hospital. I have received your letter. You crossed out everything that did not apply and signed it, and if you added a single word of your own, the card was destroyed and nothing was sent at all. Millions of men told their families they were alive by deleting the alternatives. 4 in the afternoon. Sleep in pieces. You sleep in a hole scraped into the side of the trench, sitting up in daylight an hour at a time. Nobody in the front line is properly rested, ever. And falling asleep on sentry duty was a capital offense. More than 300 British and Commonwealth soldiers were executed during that war for offenses of that kind, and they were pardoned in 2006, about 90 years too late to be of any use to them. 6 in the evening. Stand to again. And then the trench wakes up properly, because darkness is when work becomes possible. Ration parties come up the communication trench with food and water and duckboards on their backs. Wiring parties climb out in front to repair the barbed wire, screwing the pickets into the ground by hand instead of hammering them, because silence matters more than speed. All of it in the dark, all of it in the open, all of it within earshot of German working parties doing the identical job, in the identical mud, 40 yards out. Midnight. You are in a listening post, a short sap dug out into no man's land, lying still. You can hear them, coughing, a shovel, somebody dropping something and somebody else swearing about it, and they can hear you. Now, before the twist, we have to be honest about the arithmetic, because everything so far might sound survivable. Soldiers were rotated, around 4 days at a time in the front line, then support, then reserve, then out. Which sounds manageable. It was not, and the reason is one word from the staff paperwork: wastage. That was the official term for the men lost when nothing was happening, not battles. Snipers, random shells, accidents, sickness. In a battalion of 800 men, wastage could reach 10% in a single month. 80 men. In a quiet month, in a sector with no name, in a week no historian writes about, in a place where officially nothing occurred. That is what quiet meant. Quiet meant 80. And this is where the day you have just lived turns into something else entirely. The men on both sides worked out an arrangement. Historians call it the live and let live system, and there is an entire scholarly book about it by Tony Ashworth. In the quiet sectors, the 2 armies quietly stopped trying to kill each other. Artillery fired at the same hour every day at the same empty stretch of ground, so everybody knew when to be somewhere else. Ration parties were watched and not shot at, because the other side had ration parties too. The morning hate was aimed deliberately high. There were truces to collect the dead and truces to rebuild trenches after floods, because floodwater does not care what flag you are standing under. This is not the Christmas truce of 1914. That one is famous because it was extraordinary. This is the ordinary one. Unspoken, never negotiated, never written down, and it appeared again and again wherever men were left in one place long enough to work it out, and the high command knew. So they ordered trench raids, small parties of men, faces blackened with burnt cork, going over the wire at night into the enemy trench to kill a few men where they slept and drag one back for questioning. The stated purposes were intelligence and maintaining what the orders called an offensive spirit. Read that phrase again because it is a confession. An army does not have to order its men to maintain hatred unless the hatred is running out. You cannot keep a quiet arrangement with somebody who might climb into your trench at 3 in the morning. The raids worked, not because of the intelligence they gathered, because of what they destroyed. So the day you have just lived through was not empty. The waiting was the war. And in the middle of it, hundreds of thousands of men in 2 armies arrived at a conclusion that never appeared in a newspaper, that the enemy was the water, and the lice, and the rats, and the cold, and the clock, and that the man 200 yards away was standing in the same weather, fighting the same things, on the same side of everything that was actually trying to kill them. They were ordered to stop believing that. And the order arrived with a blackened face and a knife. The rats never had that confusion. They had one clear objective. They applied it to both armies equally, and they were the only participants on that entire front line who ate well. Most days, for most men, the First World War was 2 frightened people standing in the same rain, in 2 ditches at 4 in the morning, waiting for a sunrise that was not going to improve anything, and then being told off for not hating each other enough. If you want to see a day at the other end of every possible scale, where a bell decides everything and the man obeying it is the last absolute monarch in Europe, that one is on your screen now.